Du må sidde lige, hvor du har lyst til.
Just mind the water.
So we don't have fancy papers or anything. So, but maybe so if you want, you can take notes. Also, if you like it. I'm thinking this will be sort of a conversation between maybe the five of you. I'll ask some questions. Maybe the audience would like to ask questions, and also Sarah will look out for if there's some questions from the live stream. Maybe people from watching us online will have some questions for you as well. So I took some paper for you so that in case you like one of the others is saying something where you find this is interesting, I would like to ask. Personally, I like to take notes. So this is very low-key fancy notebooks thing. This is not we don't spend all our money on professional conference equipment.
Yeah, but that works very fine for us.
Yeah.
This is good.
So thank you all for joining us and to the live audience. Also apologies for being late. I would actually start by saying something about the place that we are in. This place is a football club called BK Scott. And as far as I remember, maybe Amanda can correct me, this is the club in Denmark with the largest number of members. They have about 5,000 members, is that right? 3,000 members. And BK Scott is really interesting because they do a lot of other things than football. As you can see, they have a cafe next door. They have a paternity club, a maternity club. They have a senior club. And they do a lot of things in terms of also trying to engage more women and girls into football. And so they're really working on building a community around the whole club. And but it's also a little bit behind the big national stadium. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to find, and that's why we are running a little bit late. But thank you all for coming. And I'll just give an introduction to the 5 of you. First, we have Deluba. Deluba arrived in Denmark a few months ago. She's a refugee from Afghanistan and living in Sandholm Refugee Center and has fled from Afghanistan after Taliban took over the country. Deluba is a teacher, teaches English as a second language. Did teach English as a second language in Afghanistan, also football coach, and he's doing volunteer football activities at Sandholm also. Then we have Marie. Marie is the director of Dignity, which is the Danish Institute Against Torture.
The clinic in Dignity.
Clinic in Dignity, all right.
Not all of Dignity.
All right, sorry, yeah, true. And she specializes in traumatized refugees and the families. Has a PhD in what?
Psychology.
Psychology, yeah. She's worked both as a researcher and in the field for many years. Then we have Mosda. Mosda is also a refugee from Afghanistan. Iran, sorry.
Yeah.
Mosda Qasimiani.
Yes.
And you came to Denmark in 1995 as part of the quota system, which is also an interesting sort of political aspect of refugees that maybe we won't be talking so much about today, but it's interesting how that actually could also affect the mental health in the way that quota refugees are perceived. Mosda is a psychologist, and she's been working both with governments, local governments, and NGOs, so working in different areas, and specializes in traumas, refugees, and crisis. And I also took note of that you're also aiming at educating the media, which I find quite interesting and in this perspective.
Yes.
Tamina Salih, women's rights activist and public speaker, and I like that. It's Tamina is from Afghanistan.
Yes.
You came in 2000.
Yeah.
With your family.
Yes.
and you have a master's in international relations.
Yes.
And is now working both within education, income, leadership positions, and is working very
For Afghan women, yeah.
yeah, for Afghan
Afghanistan.
women, yeah, in Denmark. So you're with the Afghan diaspora in Denmark. Yeah.
Trying to make workplaces and all what you mentioned for Afghan women in Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan, all right.
We are working here, but for them. And
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification.
yeah, of course.
And Aras Seture is a lawyer, human rights activist, and has also a degree in migration studies. Also working with the research in forced migration. And what I found quite interesting is two things. Is you're focusing on substance use disorders in forced migration. And the other thing that you are actually also educating privileged people to understand what kind of life experiences refugees are going through. And you're doing this in a supper club concept. So that is also very interesting in working both in research and also how can you use this research in converting. So welcome all 5 of you. Welcome to the audience and welcome to people watching us live. Now, I'd like to begin with asking you about sort of more general question about how much does displacement affect a human life? So this whole process of being forcibly displaced, how does that affect human life? And let's begin in the other end this time, Aras.
Answering your question, I would like to make certain separations of the phases of migration, because quite a lot, I think recently, there is a really big focus on only when the migrant is arrived. And I think the impact of displacement starts already when the migrant think of leaving the country, leaving the home country. So I would like actually maybe to frame a little bit the discussion of the phase of before leaving the country, because we have so many migrants who are suffering from traumas already when they didn't leave the country. And then there are some impacts on the path of migration from the moment that the migrant decides to leave until he or she arrives. And then later on, the whole process of getting into the new country, integration, being uprooted, finding himself, that's also so that's maybe I didn't completely answer your question, but I would like, if we want to approach this topic, would pay attention to these 3 phases, which makes our understanding broader about the impacts of displacement. Shortly about the impact, I believe that in these 3 different phases, there are different push and pull factors that acts differently on migrant, and displacement in general is a very broad umbrella on all these issues that I'm sure that the other panelists here who have a background in psychology can enlighten our understanding much better on how it impacts.
Right. Tamina?
So, I'm sorry, I actually forgot your question. So
That's okay. It was incredibly broad. So how does forced displacement affect the human life?
Yeah, which is a very good question. And now I'm not a psychologist, but I have worked many years with refugees and especially rejected asylum seekers in different camps. So maybe therefore I am here. But so I will be talking from my experience while working with them. And also I have myself been a refugee and been to lived in different asylum centers until we got asylum. It was actually very well said, because it has lots of impacts, and it starts already when you decide to leave your country, because the decision is based because you have some kind of issue. Either it's violence, either it's poverty, it's persecution. It can be many factors. So first and foremost, already there's so many things happening that can have or have mental health issues. Can create. And then you move to a new country. So you leave your network, you leave your family, you start over with hopes and dreams of a better future. In a country usually that is very opposite of what you know. Culture is different, language is different, religious sometimes can be different. So there are so many things that you lose, but you have a dream that, okay, now I will start over, things will be better. And often we don't know that actually it's not that simple. So when they come here, they are surprised by new problems and issues that they suddenly see. Okay, they have to prove to some decisions makers that they actually have issues. That itself, it's that in many cases, and unfortunately in Europe, as we all know, it's also a very difficult phase of not just the words is not enough. You have to have documentation, proofs. You should say things exactly the same, in all different interviews, not missing any detail. So just this very fact of talking about your issues and trying to convince others that I actually deserve to be here itself is another problem, trauma, what I don't know what to call it. You probably have better names for it. And then this can take so many years. It can go on, unfortunately, for 5 years. I have seen cases that people haven't, now not to discourage anybody, but 12 years it has sometimes gone, but they still haven't gotten any yes or no. So this being in the middle country, nowhere, has also its impacts. And then just to make it short, but also when you also get asylum, then another part of it starts when you have to learn the new culture and being integrated. And now I'm talking all the problems, but there are also, of course, solutions. It's not because that's it and that's the fate of everyone who decides to leave. So there are luckily things we can do to help in these matters.
Yeah, Master?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited about being here because, being a refugee myself as a child and adolescent, and also just working with refugee young people, I know how much, having small pockets of communities that you can be part of, especially being able to do some sport, just doing things that are make you feel that you are a normal human beings like everybody, that you are a young person again, or a child, has a significant effect on your growth, on your development, on how you see yourself, how you see the community around you, the feeling of belonging that could create in itself, the connection, building trust among the people that you are with, all that have, it's tremendous what it can do. So thank you. And for the question of what does migration, how does it affect human beings in general, and especially young people, I would say it affects every aspect of your life as a human being. It changed you so essentially that it's almost, new research almost actually shows that it can become on DNA level, with the stress that puts on you on generation to come. Because every decision that you're going to make the rest of your life is kind of going to be affected by the fact that you or your family has been displaced. A lot of people, a simple thing as, when they see me, they say, oh, you have always dreamt of becoming a psychologist and doing this work with refugees. And it would sound so amazing if I said, yes, that's how it has been. But the reality is that, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted, my dream kind of changed throughout the life, and I wanted to be a lawyer. But all that couldn't happen because I was refugees throughout my life until I was 16. And when I came to Denmark, I didn't have my asylum permit for staying here more than 3 years. So when I was going to make the decision of how am I going to spend the rest of my life, what am I going to do, I didn't think about what am I most passionate about. I actually thought about, okay, in 3 years, I might have to flee to Sweden or Canada or somewhere else. So what subject am I going to take in order not to be, pushed behind again several years? Because that's how I felt. I felt like I have lost time. I have lost opportunities. I have lost people. The loss is such a big part of your life when you are displaced. So the decision was made based on that. Where am I going to go where the only thing I have to do is learn a new language, and then I can start my education from there. And that's really important because what you're going to study has a huge impact also on what you're going to work with, where you're going to live, what kind of people you're going to meet, what kind of opportunities you're going to have in your life. So one of you said the phases are really important, and it's also important to have the definitions of refugees. It's not just refugees, asylum seekers. Most of the refugees out of the 84 or 82 million people who are displaced, they live actually within their own countries. They are internally displaced, which was my family, the first 3 years. And that's, you don't have UN tents, just waiting for you. I work for Doctors Without Borders right now, and we're still in Afghanistan, and it's organizations like these that actually are there to help you, and maybe none at all. So, and then the next phase is that you flee to the, bordering country. That's something that everybody talk about, especially in Europe, that we have to help people there. And the reality is, when you get there, it's not like you're in safety. You're still, you don't have the right to apply for asylum. You don't have the right to go to school, to have a job, use the health system. So that's why people actually end up fleeing and trying to get to Europe and other places in order to get the opportunities for their children. Because research shows, when people flee to the nearby countries, after 3 years, that's when they start. And if there's not opening up for the opportunities to have a normal life, or futures for their children, that's when they start thinking about the next step, because it's really important for them that their children will have these opportunities. But now I'm gonna just keep going, but I'm gonna make it short, just to say that fundamentally it changes you. Your trust, which is really important when it comes to human psychology, trusting other people, trusting yourself, trusting the world, having the feeling of safety, all that disappears. And young people, your identity is affected in a huge way. You get a adult identity, where on one hand, you're the adult, especially the unaccompanied refugee children. You have to be the adult one. And at the same time, when you come to a country like Denmark, you're treated like a child because you need to get your childhood back. And you're cut between these two worlds. And there's a lot of loss and grief that has to be processed. And new research actually shows that it's not the trauma that we have to focus on the, from the get-go, because we put refugees in a category of traumatized people. And basically, it's 50% of the people who are refugees in Denmark and who are traumatized who end up getting the diagnosis of PTSD. So, but depression, anxiety, grief, loss, these are, the huge challenges that a lot of, if not most, refugees, especially young people, go through. And part of it is also, finding your own identity and the sense of belonging and getting over the feeling of being unwanted. I'm going to stop. somebody have to say that because
All right.
I can't keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
Sorry,
a lot of
Gloria.
interesting, but it also triggered some thoughts in all of you, and I think we'll go on to Marie and Deluba, but afterwards also maybe you could, which kind of thoughts has it triggered in each of you, what the others have said?
Yeah.
So Marie?
Yeah, this is hugely inspiring, and it's such a grand theme. So I think all
Yeah.
of us could speak on for this for hours. But thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here as the only non-refugee. And also thank you for making this in English. I think in Denmark we're not very good at reaching out and establishing this kind of community, which is really important, I think. So thank you. And how does the refugee experience impact us? As a psychologist, of course, we know that our lived experiences make us who we are, and also the experiences of our parents make us who we are. And every day in our clinic, we're just very close to here. We have a clinic where we treat traumatized refugees and their families. We are 30 clinicians, doctors, psychologists, social workers, and physiotherapists. And we treat both children and families and adults, and have existed actually as the oldest center in the world to treat torture survivors and trauma victims. And we work to help people get to terms with their experiences and live and enjoy a fulfilled life. And so I think, of course, the trauma experience and the refugee experience make us who we are, for good and for bad. And I think a lot of people ask me and ask our staff at Dignity, how can you work in this field? It's so hopeless. And I think quite the contrary. We see everyday people, we see the strength of human resiliency. We see people, families who experienced horrible things. And despite this, they end up living good lives in Denmark and coming to terms with this experience. And we see the power of love, the power of relationship, the power of community. And this is very, very hopeful. So there's a lot we can do. And I think we don't know enough about this. And a lot of our clients say now that they come in, they think everyone treat them just as a refugee. In Denmark, we just talk, this is a traumatized refugee, but the refugee experience is so complex and so different, depending on if you're from Afghanistan or if you come from Somalia. It's such different life experiences. And in Denmark, at Dignity, we're hitting this Danish trauma database where we're collecting data from all the clinics, so we can know more about the different types of refugee experiences, the different types of traumas. And we know on average people have experienced 17 different traumas. And of course, depending on what trauma you experienced, how, you need different interventions. And we're working, I think there are a lot of very engaged people in Denmark and also in Europe working to try to get more knowledge so that we can help better. And really that is what we try to gain the knowledge so we can help more people better.
I think that's a very positive, positive input to this. Thanks for that. Diluba?
So thank you for having us. It is so nice to be here and talking to all of you and then reflecting back. So I will just dig a little deeper and then I'll speak for my personal experience because I'm the new one here. And it has been only 3 months that we have been here. So with all the emotional, physical, and all the challenges that we are facing, there comes new challenges when you are going out and exposing yourself to the society. You feel alienated, like people look at you like not as like a human, or they just feel threatened by you, or they just react differently. Some are extremely kind and you feel welcomed and you're like, oh, this is a good start. You're just going to merge with the society and then learn all these new experience and then just get as diverse as you can with the society. But then occasionally there will be time when you go out and then you, with the sense of identity that you have, of course, you will be dressed a certain way, you will do your hair a certain way, and then there are certain things about you which you have inherited from your parents, grandparents, and all that, and then you cannot change that about yourself. And then there are some thinking that is still So when you go out in the society and you expose yourself, you see a lot of challenge out there. So this displacement is not that something that anybody would do it out of choice. It is something that happens, and there is no other way of dealing with it but just like accepting it and like moving forward from there. So I think this forced displacement that has happened to our family or to the people who I know who are in Sandholm with me living, it has affected us in terms of emotion. I think yes, PTSD is something that all of us are dealing with, and I think like a lot of us will be needing to go to a psychologist. But then again, there is the ideology of this modern world where you have to go and talk to the psychologist and do all of that, which is something we are not used to. So that is something that we have to learn. And again, there comes the topic of trust. If you're gonna trust the person or the psychologist, like even though it is something that that is very common in European or American in all these other places, but it is not something you do in a lot of Asian countries. So it's quite a challenge.
Yeah. Yes, Marie, and then Arash.
Yeah, no, just a short comment on your thoughts on this coming to terms with your experiences. I think a big issue in our treatment session, we work with what's called narrative exposure therapy, where we help people do a lifeline. And I think when I say these experiences impact us for good and for bad, it's because there is so much resilience. I see so many of our clients are very, very brave because in order to come to terms with their experiences, they have to face the darkness and the experiences. And really that is what we do in treatment. We help to integrate, because a lot of our patients say they don't feel they're themselves anymore. They feel different. They feel disclosed from their self, and they can't connect their old self with their new self. And that process, that therapeutic process of being able to look and accept, I think you said it, what has happened, so that you can be yourself again, I think is a way of explaining the treatment.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give a small feedback to you. I'm personally very happy that you are here, because here in Denmark we have really a huge problem on representation of refugees in general.
Exactly.
When you open Danish media, it doesn't matter if it's newspaper or TV or radio, there are either whites or, let's say, non-refugees talking about refugees, or refugees are just numbers. So we don't have, we have faceless creatures that we are talking about. So in that regard, I'm extremely happy that you are here, and thanks to you that you had this inclusive approach to invite the panelists. What I also wanted to add, because Mujda also used the word migration, I just wanted also to, it's extremely important that we use forced migration, because I believe that you agree with me that in like legally speaking, defining refuginess is very important, that we push on the definition of forced migration. Because when we talk about migrants, especially, I mean, it could be forced, it could be voluntary. And the ones who have a choice to get back to the country have a very different experience to the ones who don't have this chance. So when we talk about refugees, we basically deal with a blocked past and unclear future. And I believe in defining the mental issues of refugees, these two notions of time, about the past, about the future, and in many cases, very fragile present, is really important to consider as well.
It's very important point to distinguish. Mostly. And I was thinking with your.
I don't disagree.
No.
I don't remember that I said force or anything. So
but it's a good point that we tend to say things without thinking about what it implies. We tend to just say, "Oh, migration or refugees," and mix it all up together. But there's a vastly big difference on how much control you have over your own life.
I think the media and being part of the political debate sometimes, it also forces you to think about things in a very categorical way. But I have to say, I absolutely agree that refugees and forced migration is a very specific field, and these are vulnerable people, and we have to treat them as though. At the same time, what has been really important for me when I'm out and speaking and fighting for human rights in general is saying that for me, I have specifically, I talk about children, and for me, it's about any vulnerable child, really. Because what the politician tried to do, not only in Denmark, but in general in the Western countries, is dehumanize migrants and refugees. It becomes, a political statement. So people kind of forget that these are human beings, these are children we're talking about. And for me, it's really important to say, yes, there are, legally, and when it comes to research, there are definitions of who are in the front row of, their cases has to be treated. But we just have to remember that human beings in need are human beings in need, no matter their situation. And they deserve, a child who is migrated with their families, with choice or no choice, they deserve to be treated in a right way, in a human way. So I definitely agree with you. And we do all these distinctions all the time. But at some point, I end up kind of shouting that we're talking about human beings and not politics, not definitions, because we went from talking about using the word refugees now to say human beings who have refugee experience. Just because we don't want to use refugee statement or definition anymore, because it's so negative definition now. For me, it was something to being political refugee was something that we were proud of. And now you have to be careful even saying that you're a refugee. Like you say, people see you as a threat. Oh my God, would that mean you're going to come here and apply for asylum? So kind of pushing back on that, that definitions are important, categories are important, but going back to again and again saying, it's human beings, and that matters.
But again, I think that definition is being abused or misused by the media or politicians in power, because being a refugee is just a status. It doesn't identify the person. The person, as you very rightly expressed, is human being. And I also partly agree with you and partly disagree that, of course, there are vulnerable people, but we also have to constantly be careful that helping them, assisting them is not ending up in a pity feeling. Because I believe, in general,
absolutely. I never put them in a pity feeling.
Yeah, most of refugees that I met, especially recently, like in the past 6 years, are very resourceful people. They just don't have a chance. I mean, the voices of them are not being echoed, or are not being represented.
I don't think I have said anything that could indicate that.
I'm not saying that you said that. I actually, with most of your talks, I'm totally agree. I just, because you use vulnerable.
Well, they are vulnerable at the same time that they're resourceful. They are in a vulnerable position. Being an asylum seeking position, it is a vulnerable position. Being a refugee, not having any rights, it is indeed vulnerable. Doesn't mean that you as a human being have resources still, and you have to focus on these resources. People around you have to focus on these resources. So it's not exclusive, they are actually mutual, because you are both.
I'd like to get back to this actually, because it's interesting, and it's also interesting how that would affect mental health. But I think Tamina had a comment also.
I think it's a very interesting discussion.
Yes.
And everything you all say is so inspiring, and I learn also. But one of the things that during my work and also during the time I was at the Asylum Center, but also when I was working with asylum seekers. Something that I noticed is that in many ways, it's actually very important to remember that they also are resourceful, because this experience itself that breaks you, it builds you also at the same time. Usually it's during difficulties, it's during challenges that we are forced to think, we are forced to question our identity, find out who we are, and rebuild ourselves. Like for my own self, when I came here to Denmark in 2000 as a Muslim Afghan refugee, and in 2001 the whole thing with 11 September happened, and then I was not only just a Muslim Afghan refugee, I was also kind of categorized as a terrorist Afghan refugee Muslim. And all this made me, which up until then, I was just not thinking about all these questions, this big defining identity defining questions, but I was forced to do that because I came to a new culture. I was questioned, and I found answers, and I'm today proud of the person I am because now I have chosen to be that. I'm just not. I haven't just gotten, for example, my religion or my identity by inherent, like by my parents, but I chose to because I researched, I asked. So my point is exactly that it also in many ways build us and give us a strength which we should remember, because what happens in this asylum process is usually we talk about difficulties, which we should as well, of course, and they go through interviews, through meetings with psychologists, and they forget that they actually had some good things in life and there might be waiting good things, so this positive thinking just gets totally, and imagine doing that in 5 years in a row where you concentrate on talking about the problem but not what is on the other side of it, which I feel we should also be better to do that.
I just want to add something to what she just said. And then, yes, that is true that difficulties does shape us. And then, of course, it has a lot to take away. And then being in the position of asylum seeker and then a refugee, sometimes you forget all the good things that has happened in your life because you're consistently thinking that, okay, now I'm in this position, I have lost everything that I had, including your identity. So you go out there, you seek for asylum, and then you are like, okay, so what can I say that could actually help them consider me consider me as a person who deserved to. Like you have to just consistently prove that all these bad incident that has happened is the reason that you are seeking asylum, whereas this should have been something very obvious for the world. Because of course, if anybody would have a choice to stay in peace, stay safe, like why would they like apply to an asylum center, or why would they be a refugee? So yeah, exactly.
Marie?
Yeah, I just also in connection to this, just wanted to point out that this is exactly what we work with our patients when we do the narrative exposure, where we actually sit on the floor and we ask the patients to put flowers for the good experiences and stones for the bad experiences. And this process of putting flowers for instance, a marriage or some of the very big experiences is very therapeutically important, because if people can connect to these good feelings, there's a lot to work with. And it's many people with severe PTSD can't connect yet. So that would be a challenge. But then you have the whole life story. And when the therapy is finished, you write the story. So you actually get a book where you combined the good and the bad experiences. So you can be yourself with what you've experienced. But I think that there is so much strength in these also strong childhood memories, feelings of being taken care of love and so on. These experiences you need to connect with. And a lot of people forget them in that process.
But I'm thinking like, not because you are working with traumatized refugees, and not everybody needs a psychologist, but also thinking that when you have to relive your experiences, because you have to tell them over and over again, you might end up needing a psychologist due to the process. So I was thinking, like, how can we build on these resources? Because there, as you said, people are resourceful. If you can flee about 4,000 kilometers. If you can talk to human smugglers, if you're a political refugee, then you obviously have a lot of power. You have a lot of courage. So if we can build on the resources, could we and utilize people, talk more about people's resources? How is that helpful in the mental health, and how is that, could we actually have less traumatized people? Tamina?
I can't say if we will have less traumatized people, but I definitely can say, because I'm not a professional as such, a psychologist, but I can guarantee that it will have an effect, because also this narrative is so important, also in the political era, that we don't see refugees just as beneficiaries, people we should help, but we should also see them as resources, people who have knowledge of different, being exactly this part of the decision of leaving your country, starting all over itself is a power, okay? And then doing it, and then living it. So they are powerful people, which they should see, and people should see. And when we do that, we will totally, probably, I think, our approach will change. We will not see them exactly as beneficiaries, but maybe partners we can learn from. We can give them something, they can give us something. So it's very important to also have focus on possibilities, on resources, on the power that they have, the strength that they have, for them to remember that, so they don't forget it, but also for the society, the new community that they enter. And hopefully it will take some of this bad political narrative that's happening right now, all these topics that is very...
Yeah. Was there
by the end of the day, we all agree.
Yeah.
I think, so we do agree, but yes, I think that's why we are here, all of us. But just to be the devil's advocate, and that's kind of part of what I do, is it's so important to find a balance, because there's no doubt that all of us who are refugees or have refugee backgrounds and sitting here today, we are resourceful. We're strong. We're able to overcome a lot to be able to sit here and even vocalize and talk about these things. And that, comes with a responsibility. You have a voice, you have a strength, you have resources, then we use it somehow to be the voices of the people who are not able to do that. And one thing that is so essential for me is, yes, it is. There's no doubt we have to fight to make sure that people's vision and ideas about what it means to be a refugee changes in order to see us as human beings and not, people in need. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we don't get to the, in our eager to make that happen, that we end up stigmatizing the people, the refugees who are actually vulnerable, because there's a lot of us. Like in a family with my family, we're 9 kids, and half of them, most of them were unaccompanied refugees. They end up all over the world. My parents, really strong people, but at the same time, when we came to Denmark, they were not that strong anymore. They were not that resourceful anymore. They couldn't get a job. My mom was at a hospital throughout my childhood. She's not able to get a job. My sister and my brother have PTSD, not able to do the things that I do. And suddenly I am in the midst of this big family, the resourceful one. And the guilt that comes with that. And at the same time, my fight every day to say, yes, I deserve to be here, but my family who are not able to work, the ones who are not able to give as much as I can to the society, they actually deserve as much, if not more, the respect of the society, because there's a reason why they are sitting in the dark, isolating themselves, not being able to get a job. So I think there's a huge balance that we have to remember to vocalize. So, because if you keep saying that we are resourceful, we're the resourceful, then there will be, the workplaces like your clinic will actually work there shortly. Suddenly, you don't have the fundings that it takes to help the people who are not resourceful. So, there's a
Yeah.
huge
I
balance.
think Tamina will do it, and then you can go around, and I might have you as well, Marie. But I can see
Yeah.
Tamina is very eager.
Yeah, but that's because talking about resources as well doesn't mean we should in any way undermine the difficulties that are also there. So exactly a balance, because now what's happening is also, I feel I have experienced that we are also keeping them in that position, and many times because we only speak about that. We should also speak about that there are not everyone at the same level, but even that vulnerable person who can't get a job has some kind of power, something that she can look forward to. So showing that hope, showing that strength in her, showing exactly what you said, that even though it's okay you can't find a job, it's okay you have PTSD, but that's also coming from a strength because you took the step, you have experienced difficulties. That's why you're here. It's actually, so I'm not in any way saying that we should not concentrate on the issues. We should not give them the help they need, the conversations they need to have with a psychologist, like investing in them. But we also have to remember to also talk about the other side of it for their sake and for the society's sake. Yeah. So all for it.
As I said, it's a balance. It's
Yeah.
not black and white.
Aras?
I think I keep it for later. I agree with you with keeping the balance, but I also think that the country that the refugee ends up also makes a lot of difference. Like how many refugees, I would say you are talking about yourself. You say that you are resourceful and you are here and vocalize your voice. But I would add to
No, I'm
your
not
point.
only talking about myself. I'm also
I
talking
can,
about
I
the.
can totally relate to her because like what she just said, I was like thinking, oh, this is just me and my family.
Yeah.
That was my story.
Mm.
Yeah, this
And
is,
I would
think,
say that
yeah.
you are the lucky ones. I know so many resourceful refugees who don't have a network, who
But
don't,
then
who
it
don't
comes
know
with a
Well,
lot
we
of
anything.
I didn't have it
responsibilities.
either when I
Yeah.
came,
That's true.
20 years
That's
ago.
true.
It doesn't just appear. It's hard work, and it's going down in the dark and having the depression and pulling yourself up. It is having, living in uncertainty, not knowing if you're going to get asylum. You're sitting in refugee camps. I have been through all these process, and now I'm on the other side and talking about it. So it's not just,
Just to add more on that, and then you are here, you're safe, you are looking forward, and you want to look forward, you want to move on, but then you don't know what you are actually looking forward to because you don't know how wide your circle could be or how much you're gonna have, because you just know you have to keep moving. But then there is a lot of uncertainties, and then you don't know exactly at one point that you're gonna get shut.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Plus, at the end of the passing through the pool, we are all human beings. So
Yes.
we are not heroes, and we should live our life as well. So, as you say, the guilt or the pressure that you feel like, okay, I passed through this difficult pool and I have to save others. Is that also, do you consider it as a trauma? Or
It's
I
a
don't know.
survivable guilt.
Yeah.
It's a symptom.
Yeah, and it's human. It's human, and I think again, when we talk about this, I think we have to focus. We're all humans.
Yeah.
And it's human to feel that guilt.
Absolutely.
And I think within our clinic, what we also talk about is most of our patients are like you described, your parents, and part of the process is focusing on the resources, that their story and getting in touch with these resources. But there are a lot of Danish people as well that are in the same situation. So also politically, we try to say that this is in order to fight loneliness, mental illness, we need more knowledge. So instead of because I think this dichotomy between refugees and Danes, this is very poisonous, and it's alienated. People are alienated, and we need to in order, when we talk about resources, we need to break that down and focus on the general human experience.
Is there so we're talking? The conversation is very much political right now, and that was really not the aim, but still, it really makes me think.
We can pull it back.
If
Start from zero.
if we stop actually, when we talk about mental health as a general societal issue, and don't distinguish between what kind of mental health issues does a young Dane born in Jutland experience versus what is a refugee coming from, fleeing from Afghanistan and not knowing, living in an uncertain future experience. But just talk about the mental health issues that human beings explore, and that can be depression, that can be mild depression, hard depression, it can be anywhere on the continuum. Do you think that it would weaken the case, it would take money away from and attention away from this specific traumas that refugees are experiencing if we stop talking about the differences and only talk about mental health issues for human
There
beings?
are differences.
There are huge differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's,
As we know,
so we need to,
refugees are not getting the help they need.
yeah,
When they only contact the system when they're really psychotic.
yeah,
The data shows they underuse, despite we know that refugees have a much higher rate of mental illness, they use the system much less.
yeah,
So as it is now, but I think an interesting point, we just worked with the children from Al-Hol, the children from the Syrian refugee camps that came back to Denmark. It was in the media. And we spoke to the Danish staff about how do you cope with these children. And a lot of the staff, they didn't know what to do. And I said, what would you do if it was a Danish child? And then they knew what to do.
yeah,
So I think there is something in the process about, so this is a human being who's suffering with mental illness. What do you do? So there's something about breaking the stigma around refugees.
But there's also a cultural difference that you have to have in account when it comes to working psychologically with these people, and also the whole displacement stress and assimilation to or being part of a new society in itself. So there are layers that are specific for refugees that cannot be translated to the native living Danes and their experience with mental illness. But you can say for all young people, there's a formative phase in their life where identity builds, and we all go through the same thing at figuring out and questioning who we are, the physical changes that also happen, all that, we have been a young person in common, but then there are layers that comes of grief, of trauma, of, missing and worrying about your families at home, about not fitting in, not looking like everybody else, just because you have your dark hair. And, it's really, it's not just being a young person. Simple thing like when you're really focused on who you are as a human being, as when you are a teenager, and your physical appearance means actually a lot to you.
yeah,
And that becomes a huge issue, because when you are in when you come in the Danish society, nobody really looks like you. And what you see in the media, the portrayal of how you look is a problem. It's a negative thing. And that in itself creates a huge, huge identity issue. And that is the smallest part we can start with. Yeah.
we both have asked, and Marie had some comments to this.
We have a partner in Minneapolis in the States who work with the same treatment of refugees like we do. And what struck me was that their patients fare much better than ours. And despite the American welfare system is nothing like ours, and most of their patients work, whereas our patients, of course, in the States they had to work in order to survive, but they felt less different.
Yeah.
So there is something about the Danish society that we need to, and I think you're doing a great work in the media, but we need to do something to break this very, it still is a very small and not a very multicultural culture. I think that is a key issue.
I just wanted to add that I totally agree with you that lower chances of access to like health or mental care is of course, one drive, and the other drive is definitely cultural differences for refugees and asylum seekers, many of them. I would say from my own research experience recently, I saw massive self-medication of substance use among refugees and asylum seekers, in particular in departure centers in Denmark, the ones that the asylum seekers themselves call it hell camps, because that's where there is absolutely no solution and they have to be returned. And over there, substance use, either in form of drug or alcohol, is really, really high. And again, related to what you say, I think we in Denmark have a very urgent and a specific case that we have to push more attention and put more attention to receive a solution, hopefully.
Yeah. And in order to I don't know, will I supposed to wait for my turn?
Go ahead.
And then in order to find that balance, I think we of letting people know that this is what we are going through. We just have to do this. There's like a lot of trauma going on, a lot of mental illnesses going on, and then a lot of people might not actually know how to put it in words, and then how to actually talk about all this. So maybe if they get educated about the different forms of these, traumas that they are experiencing, and then all these mental health illnesses that there are. So a lot of people might be suffering, but then they might just consider it as this is not the primary thing that I should be focusing on, and then they just leave it back, and then it eventually adds up to the point where the person suffer the most, and then end up doing a lot of things that.
Yeah, and now talking about culture, it's actually very important to remember that this cultural difference also means that mostly, for example, if I take an example of Afghanistan, mental health issues is a very taboo topic. They actually don't talk about it. Anybody, regardless of if it's depression, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, whatever, you're called a mad person. So people don't want to actually first and foremost acknowledge that I have mental health issues. And when they come, that could be a reason, I'm not sure, but I think that can be a reason that when they also come to the host country, which is when they talk and their offers, that they actually don't go forward with it because of this cultural difference. So we also have to inform the refugees, the asylum seekers, first and foremost, what mental health issue is, categories, that it's okay, it's just as okay to be physically sick that you can so that part should also be included when we do work, because there is this difference, unfortunately, and we don't seek help. And another thing, I hope that we at one point, because as Mujda said, many times I also have seen that when they get rejected from one country, they move on to another. So having an international protocol of some sort, that they can have their journals with them, or they can be in the system register, so they don't have to start all over, is also a must. We have to invest definitely more in this area, offer everybody who comes to the country some kind of trauma help. Also the children, who we actually believe sometimes that, they don't know, because they don't know what war is, and they were protected. Many times we actually inherit, if I hope the word is correct, our parents' traumas.
Generational trauma?
Transmission.
By listening to them constantly, by even those who are born in the new country and haven't experienced war, but they have experienced it through their parents, through the stories they hear, through the cries of their mothers that they see and experience, and all that, it actually is with us. And we all sometimes forget that category, because if you're born here, then you're all right, but mostly because of our parents, we get that with us. It's in that part of our package.
Yeah.
I just wanted also to add that we talked, in the past maybe 15 minutes, we use the word trauma a lot. And I think the trauma is the highest level we are considering. There are also lower levels that actually have potential to convert into trauma. We barely talk about poverty. We barely talk about social exclusion, physical isolation that happens actually for many, not only asylum seekers, but for many refugees here. How many refugees you know who ended up in well-paid jobs? How many refugees you know in Denmark who actually have a huge network and meet Danes regularly? Again, back to the geography that we are talking about, it's also binary of like Danes and non-Danes a lot, and that also increased the social exclusion, which at one point might end into trauma as well. So trauma is not only what refugees bring from their home countries or along the way, but here actually there might be some drives that create new traumas.
I think that's so important, and I think it's a problem in Denmark at this point is that on average, people who seek help in our clinics and in the clinics around the country have been in Denmark for 15 years.
Yeah.
And that is too late. And my dream is to try to do a study where we actually offer evidence-based treatment in the asylum phase, and then do a controlled trial, and then follow for just to prove, because I think that's why we do a lot of research, in order to also to be able to convince the politicians that it makes no sense not to help at an early stage. And with Dignity has existed for 40 years, and we already have data for the first clients we had 40 years ago, and we follow them through the registers, and we can actually follow and see how those who got treatment, how their children now 40 years later, because we use the data from the registers, how their children fare better in school, not only on grades, but also on well-being. So that kind of research, I think we need in order to convince politicians to do and invest in proper intervention at an earlier stage.
Certainly.
While while working with refugees and asylum seekers, it was something that made me think twice. Was if I was in one of my consultations with somebody experiencing a bit aggression from that person, or threats, or some kind of anything, then I was always offered first psychological help, right? If let's say I had a bad consultation, which ended up wrong for whatever reasons, then there was debriefing. I was offered psychologist help. I was grateful for. But I was just thinking, why didn't I get all that when I came to Denmark? Why all those experience coming from a war zone? It should be so obvious that I also needed it then. You know, it's such an important process. You guys know that this already getting the first aid makes a huge difference. So definitely it would be an amazing accomplishment if you already could offer them at the asylum centers, but it also requires that they should also take that offer. So we break this myth about mental health among, first and foremost, those groups as well.
I think we also, but you know, for me, let's offer everybody mental health resources, because it's really important. You know, one of the researchers from Dignity actually made one of the biggest researches that with children, 500 children in asylum centers in Denmark. What her research showed, which I think is still an amazing research, that the amount of time that these children and their families spend in the process of seeking asylum and being in an asylum center has a huge effect on how they will do in the future. The ones who came out very quickly and were able to start a normal life in the municipalities, have a normal daily life, a routine, a structure, and safety of that they're going to be in the country, they did much well than the others. And a lot of the trauma symptoms that they had while they were in the asylum center actually they disappeared, even though they were not given psychological help. So there are other aspects that are also important, and the most important thing is to make sure that people, they don't live in uncertainty for a very long time. And that the phase of uncertainty is kind of prolonged. It's permanent, unfortunately, because of the political climate in Denmark.
Even after the
Yes, even after, because being a refugee is not a permanent, status. It is about being living in that uncertainty, because they're gonna send you back. So that's also something that are being done a lot of research around. And then the other thing is, like you say, psychoeducation. It's essential when it comes to all refugees in general, especially people with our culture. I think it is more helpful even than therapy for people in asylum centers, because if you're going to process your trauma, you need to feel safe. You need to feel that you're not in crisis anymore. Because it takes a lot of mental ability and capacity to be able to process your trauma. And it's not, like you said, it's not your priority right now. It is about surviving in order to get to the next step. It's about strategizing what you're going to say in your interviews, who's going to help you, the psychologist that you're going to talk to, how they're going to use the things that you're saying. What kind of recommendation are you getting? So it's all your mood, everything is about getting that asylum, that safety, getting to the next point, to the harbor, which means, trauma, processing trauma is, kind of, it gets very complicated if you're going to do that work already in asylum centers. What we have to push even more for is psychoeducation, of course, providing opportunities. So the ones who are ready and able to do that, they will do it. And then peer-to-peer. It's actually people like us who are on the other side who can be able to come and just be there. So you can interact and feel that you're part of a community, and you exchange experiences, and I can say, I've been there, I know how it is, and I promise you, just hang on there, you're gonna get to the other side. It feels like this process, you're gonna die from it, you're not gonna survive.
It feels like an endless
road.
Yeah.
And it feels like the end every day.
Yes, every day.
Yeah.
And again, even after
And you still
recovery.
have to pull yourself together, but one step at a time.
And it's so important, this that you're mentioning, the length of how long you stay.
Yeah,
So
that damage you.
And the uncertainty, because at least if you know that, okay, I'm here 1 year, and then I will know if I'm gonna stay or go. At least, okay, not that, okay, if after 1 year, but I'll actually get a result of these all interviews. Then they will tell me yes, or they will tell me no. But you don't know. You don't know if you're gonna stay here 5 months, a year, 5 years, or 12 years. And after all this waiting, you don't know where you will end up. Usually it's not the country of origin, because you usually, in my consultation, I also experienced that they always make 100 other plans.
Of course,
Yeah,
you have to have survival plans.
So this uncertainty is killing. It's actually anyone who comes here maybe without any trauma will get all these.
End up in the trauma.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
it has a huge
as
damaging
the
effect.
least thing we can say, like, okay, after this amount of waiting, you will know. But they can't. We don't even give them that.
I think it's Aras and then Marie.
I totally agree, and I also think that this is not something that after getting the status of refugee will be finished. I mean, again, legally speaking, 3 years ago, we had paradigm shift in migration policies in Denmark, which is basically based everything on temporariness, meaning that all the ones who got the status of refugee are not even promised to, at one point, to be citizen of this country, meaning that at any time the arriving country is safe enough, the Danish government may return them to the country, and that again is a big source of, I would believe, trauma for many refugee families. Even the ones who are settled in Denmark, at any point might be forced to return. So again, this temporariness that both of you rightfully mentioned is extremely important, to find that peace in mind that, okay, this is my country, that I can establish my life, I can find my network, I can practice my resources. my experience of research shows that actually many refugees don't feel like this in Denmark.
Yeah, and I think this is, of course, very, very concerning. And we know this, and it's been documented in many settings. And we also see it in our clinic when we look at the different traumas people experience. We always try to identify the index traumas, which are the traumas that come in flashbacks and are the most acute and most vivid memories. And for many of our patients, it is a trauma is experienced in the asylum phase. That are those that actually are the most severe. So, and we have documented also that the length of stay in asylum in so many ways affect many years ahead how people fare. So this is certainly something that's a huge problem. And I think what I think is a problem here is that in dignity we can't treat people in the asylum phase. You have to have a permanent status in order to receive treatment.
Red Cross can do that.
Yeah, but Red Cross can do that, but they're not a highly specialized center, and they don't use evidence methods in the same way. And that actually, for instance, with family treatment, we have treatment sessions that can be for a year, and often it is a long process, and it can be very healing because the family can be a positive spiral. There's a lot of love and connection if you help them, but it takes time. And so I think that would be very important to kind of change the system. So you say this is important. You do a proper screening when people arrive, and those who are ready, you do psychoeducation, and then those who are ready to do the trauma treatment, because PTSD is very severe, and you actually can't treat many of the symptoms.
I just wanted to add that yes, Red Cross can intervene, but they are only allowed to intervene on urgent cases.
Yeah.
And that's another
12
thing.
sessions.
Like with all the rejected asylum seekers that I interviewed 1 year ago, many of them were in severe conditions, but because the person who would check on them, he didn't find the situation very urgent. Red Cross couldn't intervene and give some resources to them.
And even when they do, they can only do 12 sessions.
Yeah.
Which is not very much.
No.
So speaking from someone with a refugee experience, I was curious to know if I wanted to address this to Danish politicians who are not interested in having, basically anyone from outside Denmark coming to the country. How would it feel if I spoke about the urgency of the need for, better mental health issues or better mental health care or all these things that we are talking about in terms of economy, to say people will be more able to contribute to the country. They'll pay tax. They'll pay higher taxes. They won't be a burden to the social system or the health system. How would that feel?
Unfortunately, we are in a point where if you're going to talk to the politician who doesn't want refugees to come to this country, their answer is going to be, we just don't take them, then we won't have any financial problem.
Or externalize them,
Yeah.
like the current policies now.
I would say that I would prefer not to actually even give this argumentation that they will contribute and it will be good for economy, because here we are talking about people, humans, that as a moral responsibility, we have to offer them these things. Not because then they will give us something back, but because every human deserves to have a dignified life, a normal life without mental issues, without
and unfortunately that argument just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, that doesn't work anymore. And I think
but
I
we have
agree
to
very much.
insist very much on keeping that, because if we talk economy, then we will lose. We can't say that, well, they will all contribute and pay taxes. We don't know that. Maybe they won't ever. So that shouldn't be the reason that there always have to be economical benefits for us. But
then again, there comes the topic of the idea that if anybody is to be a refugee, right? So they definitely have something in mind that they are moving or that they are shifting, apart from the sense of security that they want. but there is something that the person wants to do with their life going forward. It's not that they say, oh, fine, okay, let's go to Denmark. It's a beautiful place. Let's go and chill there. It's not that. It's just that, okay, I'm this. I want. I have ambitions in life. I have this specific plan design life for myself. I'm gonna go and make it happen, right? So yes, of course, people think money. People think that, okay, this is a lot of financial loss if we accept all the refugees. But then again, all those people, if you invest on them, they might end up doing a lot more than you are even expecting. So they are people who actually need to be invested upon, not just like look at them in terms of, okay, these people, we might be using them in like a lower income places, and they might be okay with earning less than any other Danes or something like that. It's just not that. If you think practically, the person, okay, the energy that person brings in, or the knowledge the person have, the with all the things that the person is offering, it just doesn't have to be all about the money. You just have to invest on that as a person and let the person take the lead and show you what the person can do with the opportunities you're going to provide for them. Yeah.
I so much agree, and I think what a gift for Denmark with all these wonderful people here today. I think it is a huge gift, and we know that the more diverse a classroom, the higher the potential for learning. And it is a problem, I think, for Denmark that we're so much alike. And I think that is something we need to change that.
Because exactly, because it's not always how much we can't always. People come with all sorts of knowledge, experiences. Each of us, Danes, non-Danes, all of us. So if you always talk how this will contribute economically,
Yeah,
it's just wrong, because we can contribute with many more than just that. Meeting of cultures, diversity, and sometimes we don't. We just have to help the person. It's human right to seek asylum. It is your right to do that, and to come a country. And that country, just because we humans should help humans, also should sometimes do that. Not just because what they will give us back.
yeah.
But they usually does give
Yes.
a lot back as well.
And then you don't really specifically have to look in return, because you're not going to invest in a factory. You're actually investing in a
Yeah.
human. Okay, so it's not a business you're running. It's actually you doing your humanitarian work.
I think Maria and then
Yeah, but I think a few years ago, the Danish People's Party wanted to close all the rehabilitation clinics in Denmark, which is one of the reasons we started the Danish database, because we wanted to try to prove, which we're doing now, that really we can see 20 years ahead. You know, maybe the treatment, because the treatment is
And
very
the family work is so
exactly.
essential. Yeah.
It is not. It maybe the symptoms don't disappear, but you can live a fulfilled life being a parent.
Yeah.
You can actually be a good parent despite severe symptoms, and in the long run, you know, it makes no sense not to invest. But I think we do need the research. We do need the numbers in order to convince politicians, in order to fight back. I think we need that.
With a huge respect to what you shared, I have to say that this moral expectation that you have from Danish politics and politicians is extremely idealistic. I have to be very pessimist or realist and say that this way of argument has a very low chance to get even heard in Danish political climate right now.
I really disagree, because if we should insist on that you're humans and human beings should help human beings. Otherwise, we will just be part of the play that they lay out, like their layout.
I agree.
Okay,
I agree.
what can they do for us economically? Oh, then we get into that argument, and so why not drag them to that? Moral humanity is something we should keep insisting on, that sometimes we just, and I actually feel there's hope in everybody, even in Danish.
But that's my point. I mean, actually, that's what I wanted to follow up on. Unfortunately, I lost my hopes on Danish political climate, but what I'm very helpful, and I think talking about democracy, we have to start from the roots. So what we need in Denmark, answering your question, you targeted politicians first, but I would say that that's what I'm doing with my soccer club. We have to target civil society. That's the civil society. That's my neighbors, people around me, people around each of us network who build up this democracy and who can impact on the politics. And I know, again, you might tell me that it takes 10 years, 20 years, or it takes a long time until Danish political climate is being impacted by changing the approach. But I think changing the approach comes from people around us, and that's what we have to maybe mobilize.
Yes, and I won't say that it can take 10 years. It can actually be very effective. But that public, that civil society that you're talking is also listening to all these political debates, which is on politicians' terms. We should remind people, Danes, the civil society, that listen, not always everything has to be weighted by economy. Remember that you're a human being and you should help another human being.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we will it's why do you think that all these refugee parties against refugee are winning? Because they are getting public support, because the discussions, the debates on their terms, we have to have it on our terms and not get into those.
But I actually think this supper club, I'd like to, to sort of bring it back to something that you mentioned earlier, Moshe, about how when you're a teenager, for example, and you're going through this big formative phase and everything is difficult, and especially, you mentioned this about how you look. How you look is so important. And you, like, 1 month you're for Danish teachers, 1 month you're a goth, next month you're a hippie, and the third month you're yuppie. You would change formative. If your core looks, your core identity is always being questioned and being wrong, then obviously it's really hard to go through these formative phases where you can experiment with everything else. So if we go back to this supper club concept, and actually rather than approaching politicians, approach the public, approach people, human beings, our neighbors, we could maybe also have the surrounding society accepting the core identity and all the and minimizing some of these difficulties that refugee teenagers are going through.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, in every debate that I'm part of, and every time I'm in the media, even though I'm debating with a politician, my main target is not them. I'm not going to change their politics, but I always think about, is what I'm saying in any way and shape is going to change the way that the public is thinking. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, that the refugee or people with immigrant background, refugee background, they're gonna, especially the young people sitting on the other side, they will look at me and recognize just few of the words that I say. And actually I end up every time, it's almost like I have nothing else to say, but every time I end up saying the same sentence. It's not about politics, it's about human being. So yes, it is about your neighbors. It is about changing the perception of the individuals, because they are the one who's going to vote in few years. They are the one who's deciding who's going to get in. But at the same time, we have to remember that the aspect of fear is something is so rooted in our society now in general. We are afraid in general in the world, and now with terrorism, but also at the same time with the coronavirus, people are scared for their financial life, for the future of their children. And that, even the prime minister, almost the sentence she used, it's almost like we're in a war and living in a war zone. So and what happened when you live in a war zone and there's a government that, even if you don't agree with the government, you stick to the government because you need something that makes you feel safe when you're so uncertain. So the reality is, everywhere in the world, people are afraid right now. They are afraid for lack of resources. They are afraid what the climate gonna do. They're afraid of everything. And when I talk to people, traveling and talking to just giving speeches, a lot of people, Danes, come up to me and say, I really want to, feel differently. I really want to think differently. But at the same time, I'm really scared because what is going to happen to my grandchildren? We have limited resources that we have to share. It's not something that they talk about it openly, but it's also something that, they. So I don't know if I answered your question, but definitely what will help for young people is being able to be part of the, foreningsliv, we call it in Denmark, the communities, and financially, having money to actually buy the clothes, to be part and look like everybody, means a lot. So we have a class problem right now in Denmark because the refugees are the underclass and they keep being there because you're gonna have much debt by the time you're done with your education or your children are growing, that you're never going to be able to get up here like the majority of things, and it's going to be a huge problem. It is already, but in 10 years, 20 years, we're going to not have the clash of cultures, but the clash of classes that we already have. And I have a child who was fighting her mom, refugees, because she wouldn't buy him the things that he wanted. And he could not understand that. And he was like, I cannot invite my friends to our home because I don't have a PlayStation. I don't have the right clothes. We're having only one room. So we're all living in that room, and that's going to be embarrassing. So all that, it might be a small thing, but it's huge for a child. It's a huge thing for, the identity that you have, how you see your parents, being proud of your family background, being proud of who you are, all that, I don't know if it makes sense. And now I'm just talking and going round and round, I think.
Amina, and then
I'll make it short. No,
Thank you. I'm not good at making things.
It does make very well sense what you're saying, Ruchda. And now I forgot. I kept it too short this time. I'll get back to it, actually.
That's my strategy. I talk and talk so people forget their arguments.
I think the risk now is that we lose hope.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a difficult time. And I think when you work therapeutically, the hope is what you want to wake. And I think that's also where peer-to-peer support can do something that professionals can't. Because meeting someone who can tell you, I know where you are right now, I've been there, and I'm a living evidence that you can actually get through this and live a good life. That type of hope is very, very important. I think we need to do much more peer-to-peer support. And I think what you're doing in the media is so much needed, and we need so much more of that, because that is what creates hope. That young people can listen to someone like you and say, she's been where I am. She's making a difference. She's keeping on fighting. She believes something can happen. So I think we need to work with that. And yes, it is difficult time, and we shouldn't underestimate, when we know history, what fear can do. But focus on the hope. Yeah.
Now I remember, now that you mentioned fear, and what you also touched upon, the fact that we usually fear something that we don't know, this fear of stranger, as you said, xenophobia. So we should actually work toward unstrangalizing. Now I'm making my own word. The refugees, like, they're not strangers. We should talk about humans and not so much always economy. So we see that on the other side of all this debate are some human beings, because you would like to, in Denmark, for example, you don't have so much problem with helping another ethnical Dane than, for example, maybe a refugee in terms of financially support and economy that we just agreed upon. So making them humans again, not strangers, that can actually also help, that we might be willing to better share the resources that we have. I have something that has stuck with me during the work I have done with refugees. As once we had to all draw our dreams, what dreams scenario. And oh my God, those drawings were so simple, so something we all want. It was just a peaceful family, or not family, single, just whatever, a house where the trees and you have food and
You have some
you're
flower
living in
and
peace.
birds.
Exactly, and you're living in peace. At the end, that's what we all want. So seeing the other person as a threat always, because we don't know them yet. Once we get familiar to them, once we see that they're also people with hopes and dreams just as us, then they are no more strangers. Then they get familiar. Then they get part of the community, part of the society, people we want to share the resources with, hopefully. And it's okay to be, yes, I can be sometimes, most of the time, idealistic, but I don't mind that. We have to be that. Why are we going away from that?
And I think, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
And I think a lot of things that you said make sense because yes, I've been at a stage where I think like a lot of people look at me differently. Not just me, I'm referring to me, and then all the refugees in the camp. They're looked upon differently. But then once you start, it feels like a lot of Danes are very scared. But what are they scared of? Like, come talk to me, and then explore.
Yeah.
Explore. Maybe we might not think the same. Maybe we might have differences in a lot of ways. But like at the end, there will be something common that we will find. There is commonalities that we can find. So a lot of people that I have been exposed to, they feel a certain way about certain people, and then once you're exposed to, they're like, oh,
You're not like
such a
others.
you're not like others. You're such a different person, and you have this, and then they think it's just me. Whereas it's not just me; it's all of us. You just have to open up a little bit, and then widen up, and then go talk to the person. Like, share what you are scared of the most about a refugee or a person. Like, what is it about us that is making you feel different about us? Like, what is it that you feel like we are a threat? Just open up. Like a lot of the times they do that. Oh, you're not like the rest, but we're all the same. You just have to find the middle ground.
I think Moshe wanted.
I think there's two levels of talking about these subjects, and also if you're gonna make a difference or try to work with this, it's on the individual level, and then you have the organizational, political level, which is very different, and you use different languages talking in these two different levels. In the individual level, me and you, we can have the talk about hope, about idealism, about yes, you're good enough, but not everybody else. But at the same time, the feeling that I made at least one person to see the human being behind the refugee. But when you come to that political level, to that the power level up here, then you have to be able to
Fight for it. Yeah.
Yes, and it is about economy, and it is about whether or not your resources going to be used positively in this country. It is tough, it is ugly, and it is about surviving. It really is. And I know unfortunately in that level we're come to such a horrible space that human rights, it's become something that scares you, or what do you call it?
Slogan.
No, like
Scares
it's a bad word.
It's not only that. It's a human rights, something that some political parties are actually fighting to get away from. It's hindering what is best for this country. That's where we are. So I know what you think, and that's good. And we all have to keep being idealistic. We all have to keep holding on to the hope. But we also have to be as sharp and as cynical as they are when we are face to face with that level. Because if you don't make the change up here, then.
But Mujta, being idealistic, talking about humanity, talking about morals, doesn't mean that we're not sharp. We can.
I never said that.
Yeah, but you said we have to be sharp up there. Yes, we have to be sharp in our terms.
I said you have to.
In our terms, we don't always have to, because we will. What is it called? Most possibly, we'll lose that discussion if refugees are good economically for us.
It's
If
not
they're
just a
NSS,
financial.
That's exactly what I'm arguing. There's so
It's
many
not-
other ways a refugee, a human being, can contribute to a community than if they will pay taxes. And if we keep discussing that, we can see where we are in this today's world. Have we won that discussion? We haven't. We have lost, and that's exactly why that the politicians, using exactly this reason, are affecting the public and getting votes, because the public, the normal people, me and you, also starts thinking, okay, you're coming here, will you be paying me something later in form of money? But you have so much more than that. You probably will do that too. And this discussion is also important in that political level,
I think
because they also have to.
what is
start
dangerous
saying,
right now is that we are beyond that. We're beyond that. People, they don't care. I'm sorry, not you, but all refugees in general, even me, they don't care if I contribute with
But
anything. They don't care if there's
let's
human
change
rights
the
and all.
discourse.
They
Why
don't
are we
care
giving
about that.
up?
They just don't want more refugees to come to this
Why
country.
are we giving up that they have?
I'm
just-
not giving up.
I
I
feel
was
like
in the
I-
media every day.
But actually,
But I is making a point there that, yes, I think
I am
Aras has,
taking the punches every day.
Aras has
I
been
know,
eager
I'm
to talk
thinking
for a while.
discussion-wise where we're giving up. Why are
Yeah,
we
I think Aras has really been eager to
Please.
say something for a while.
Sorry,
now,
the ladies are going at it.
But it's great.
I just think that there is no one solution. We have to have a holistic approach. We have to keep fighting on a political level, keeping the dialogue open, not losing our hope. In the same time, we have to educate the civil society, and maybe sometimes even more important than civil society, we have to educate media. I mean, media in this country also goes sometimes quite wrong. I mean, we have to educate that very famous not politician, Radio 24, the old one, who calls himself Premier Perka just to get a status, and we have to educate the one who has himself refugee background, like how it poisonous the whole discussion of forced migration in this country. So I think on political or organizational level, I actually have to maybe tiny disappoint you. I have worked with many organizations within the field of forced migration, not only in Denmark, but also in European ones in Brussels. And I met actually quite a handful of people who I mean, they work with refugees, but refugees for them are just numbers,
Yeah.
And that's also important. So when you have this,
change that mentality.
Yes, but it comes in levels, and it comes as a holistic approach. So political level, media, civil society.
All right, so we need to start rounding up soon. But what I really think is interesting here is this. Like today, we're talking about mental health, like as a specific issue, and the discussion turned political. But I don't think that's not necessarily because we're not talking about mental health, because you've all mentioned how the way that you're perceived by the hosting nation, the receiving country, the way that you're perceived by media, the way that you're perceived by politicians and talked about politicians, the way that people look at you. It contributes to the mental health, and also if we can could actually make that approach different, then we would actually also be able to strengthen the mental health of refugees. If you didn't, there's enough to deal with. You don't have to deal with all these other things as well.
Because now we talk a lot about different things, and like mental health. To me, like when you are displaced, forcibly displaced, you lose power. You feel powerless. And that's like really important in order that, like, for the mental health. Like, how would you think? How do we need to tackle this in order that we come out of this powerless and victim, not role, but like in this position we feel as. I mean, I'm not a refugee, so I don't know how it feels like, but I can imagine it's like this feeling of powerless is like really like, like trauma paralyzing you. Like, how can you get out and create a sense of power again? Because that really helps probably with clinical diagnosis in order to come out and not feeling like you trapped. What are your opinions about it? Like,
I think this is hugely interesting from a psychological perspective. I also have a background as a crisis psychologist and done a lot of debriefing, and it always struck me that those people, if there, for instance, had been a robbery, the person who'd been under the table was the one who was most distressed afterwards, not the one who'd been fighting the robber, because the one under the table was the one who felt the most helplessness. And that feeling of helplessness is the most dangerous feeling, and it's very easy to feel when you are in an asylum phase. So there are a lot of techniques you can use, and that's why I think psychoeducation is hugely important in the asylum phase, because there are a lot of things you can do in order to give yourself a sense of agency, a sense of control, despite the situation. There's a lot, also the peer-to-peer support, access to literature, to the culture, and so on. So I think we have to focus on actually just how dangerous that period is, and there is. I was an advisor on a PhD that recently documented also how the long-term asylum phase, the long-term consequences. So we are getting numbers now that shows this makes no sense.
And if I may also add up exactly this groundlessness, not feeling of belonging, and mostly like refugees. I myself, before reaching to one country, you kind of travel through many. I myself have lived, for example, in Pakistan also, and Afghanistan, and then Denmark. So this not knowing where you actually belong also, and then coming and staying at asylum center, that is even worse, that is nowhere's land. And not, at least when you're in those countries, you know you're in that country. An asylum center, you don't know where you're. You don't know if you're going to end up Denmark, Canada, you say, back to Afghanistan. So you really feel your foundation is kind of ripped off. So having something stable, if it's something that you can kind of click to, it can be sometimes memories. I don't know, you probably know much better. It can be anything, but something that's there. That, okay, you know, this is not going to be taken from me. Something my father used to say always was, when they left Afghanistan, they lost everything, right? Their network, their house, their job. He was an architect, and having to start all over again. For him, his education was something, that stable thing, so that he got eye on, okay, I have a package with me. I lost money, I lost house, I lost my network, but my education, what I have inside me, is still with me, right? So it can be different from people, but this is a stable thing. Finding it out for any individual is very important.
And then Aras.
I think a few things. Like Maria talked about normalizing the reactions by actually having a knowledge about your reactions and your symptoms that gives you some sense of control back. And also knowing that it's not because you're losing your mind, it's actually because you're going through what you're going through, and it's a normal reaction. Everybody everywhere in the world will react the same way right now. Because the horrible thing about trauma is not only losing trust of the people around you, it's losing trust to your own ability of being able to take care of yourself or having a sense of control. That's when it becomes really lonely. That's when it all falls apart. So really working hard on keeping trusting that I can do this, I can handle this, and then starting a new dream, because you talk about loss. Your parents lost everything. You lose all the concrete things, but you lose also your dreams. Your dreams are the hopes that you talk about, and the hope gives you a sense of security and safety. And as a refugee, especially if you have been a refugee child your whole life, you don't have anything else that is more precious than your family and then your dreams, because they keep you alive during the night when you have nightmares and you're screaming and waking up in the dark and you don't know what is going to happen. If you just remind yourself of the dream of what can be tomorrow, that will help you. And you have to have goals, small goals. And even though they are imaginary and unrealistic, you have to hold on to them, because, Learned helplessness is not something you're born with. It's something is learned because you try, and the rejection you get every time. At some point, some of us give up. But that is when your network and your community and also yourself come into the picture, is holding on to, hell no, it's going to happen. And I have that dream and I have to pursue it. I always said, as a refugee, you knock on doors and you have to expect that they're going to be closed or shut in your face. But you know what you're going to be really good at is surviving. So what are you going to do? You're going to find the windows. If the windows are closed, what are you going to do? You're going to find some cracks. You're going to find ways to make noise so somebody actually realize that you're in the bunkers and save you at some point. So it is a strength that you have to find within yourself, but people around you have to help you to remember that you are not helpless.
Using
Sorry,
your ending sentence, I think you asked mainly from individual point of view, and the answers shared here were also from psycho-individual side. I would like also to answer from social point of view, from the perspective of the receiving country. And if I can share one answer to your question, is inclusion. We need more inclusive society that gives the feeling of home to a refugee. Feeling home is extremely important for showing your resources, to having a normal life. And the being and belonging that you share is also very important, but it doesn't come out until you feel home. And this being and belonging is mainly being given from the impression of the receiving country. So inclusion is extremely important to get up and run a normal life.
And holding on to who you are, like, being proud of what you have and not being consumed with the shame that the society is actually projecting to you, being able to be proud of your parents, even though right now they're not able to do anything, and they are the shadow of themselves. So, not forgetting who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, and just in this, I think in order to do that, I think you often have to face the darkness. And I think that is often, that would be some of the techniques you could use. And I think everyone is afraid of that. You see also the Danish staff, Danish people who look at refugees, because they live in an illusion that life is a safe place. Life is not safe. So a way of getting control is facing the darkness, because then you will feel the pride. It's easier to feel the pride and your identity and connect with yourself. And there are techniques you can use for that.
And can I give a last example, please? Because this one is so important. Sorry. You know what? This is a simple example. My mom, when we were fleeing, we were wealthy enough where we come from. But then when we start fleeing, suddenly you don't have anything. You don't even have clothes for your kids. So, but she would get up every morning, even though, it doesn't really matter where we were, if we had a house or on the streets, wherever we were. The most important thing she was, and she wouldn't compromise with that, even if there was bombing, is every kid had to wash their faces, to wash their mouth, even though we didn't have, toothbrushes. We had to somehow comb our hair. We had to look presentable. She had to do the same. And she was, she would spend the nights combing her hair to make sure that there was no bugs. And, she wouldn't have that her kids were walking around with, snot, what do you call it? Runny nose and stuff like that. And why was that so important? When I was a kid, I thought it was so annoying. But then when I become older and had the conversation with her, she said, it was important for me that when people looked at us, they wouldn't see us as we were, something else than we were. For her, the look, being able to look presentable even though you don't have anything. It was her way of holding on to that who she was,
Yeah.
where
Stay
she
in
came
control.
from, and that was a survival tool, and a way of never forgetting where she come from and keep dreaming of going back to that one day. So
Thank you for that example. I'd like to actually end the debate with asking you to answer, I don't know, the question about what do you do since you're still living in a refugee center, what do you do to overcome this feeling of powerlessness, to stay in control, gain some sort of control over your life?
Of course, it's it's a tough one. You don't actually have any control. You pretend like you have. So for me, the way I think I have some control over what is going to happen with me in the next few years or in the next few days is by getting up every day, showing up to all the things that I wouldn't be doing normally if I were to have my ideal life. But I get up, I show up, and then I participate in a lot of activities that I don't personally feel like I should be doing this. Even though I think it's very important that for me to be active and be able to connect or relate to the activity in some way or another, but I get up every day hoping that today might bring a new opportunity for me. I might meet someone who's gonna be someone I can establish some kind of connection with, who's gonna be supportive, who's gonna at least show me where I have to look or what I have to do. And some very small thing. I started off this journey of getting up and having some power over my life by simply volunteering in a bike shop in Red Cross. So I would fix bikes, even though I have never dealt with anything that is bike related. So I was like, this sounds like a fun idea. Maybe I should just go and then do that. And then eventually it just bellied up. And then I finally was able to find a little sense of identity of who I might be by joining soccer team and then clubs. And then I recently found a practique, but I haven't been there. So, but I just hope.
And one of the first things you told me today, like almost after we said hi, we just met. It was that you want to actually take international relations education. Which I loved. I'm like, wow, I'm meeting a girl who has holding on her dreams and already thinking that. So that's really admirable.
Oh, thank you. And I think it's just that I have come to accept that whatever I did back at home doesn't really matter here. Like I have to start from zero again. Like I have to go back to university and then start somewhere there. Even though like I was halfway through it and I was almost done, just 1 year.
But even though if you don't have certificate, you have the knowledge inside you, and remember that. So what you have learned, that it's within you. You will use it in life.
Makes your journey easier.
And thank you so much, all 5 of you, for joining us today. We've heard about fear and love. We've hopelessness, and all the various aspects and all the things that you go through, and about the importance of peer-to-peer, but also importance of surrounding society in creating a stable healthy mental health. Can you say that? Healthy mental health for refugees. Thank you so much for your time. We'd like to just give you a small token of appreciation.
Thank you so much.
So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have the pink one?
Yes, of course. It matches your shirt.
Right.
Pink or
Doesn't matter.
Can I switch?
yes, of course.
Because I have the T-shirt of
Ah,
flower,
yeah.
so maybe it's a good idea to have a in a different color. The back.
Try something new.
All right. Thank you so much, all of you.